Laura Jackson stood in her modest garden, carefully tending to her late-blooming roses on a crisp October morning. At 64, she found peace in these simple moments: the feel of soil between her fingers, the sweet fragrance of flowers, and the gentle rustling of leaves in the Chicago suburbs. 5 years after losing her husband, Thomas, Laura had built a life of quiet dignity. Her 2-bedroom home on Elm Street wasn't fancy, but it was hers, paid off after 30 years of careful saving and hard work. "Those roses are looking spectacular this year, Laura," Ellen Thompson called from across the fence. At 70, Ellen had been Laura's neighbor for over 15 years and had become something of a confidant since Thomas passed. "Thank you, Ellen. I think they like the new fertilizer I've been using," Laura replied, wiping her hands on her gardening apron. "How's Marcus doing with his knee replacement?" "Oh, he's grumbling as usual, but the physical therapist says he's ahead of schedule." Ellen leaned on the fence. "Any word from Oliver and Isabella lately?" Laura's smile dimmed slightly. "Not since last month. They're busy, I suppose. Isabella mentioned something about redecorating their kitchen. What Laura didn't say was how the mentions of her son and daughter-in-law had become increasingly infrequent. Oliver used to call at least twice a week. Now, she was lucky to hear from him once a month, and the conversations felt rushed, as if someone was monitoring his every word. As Ellen wandered back to her own yard, Laura found herself lost in thought, remembering the day 3 years ago when Oliver had come to her with excitement in his eyes. "Mom, we found it the perfect house on Maple Avenue. It has everything we want. 4 bedrooms, a beautiful yard, great school district for when we have kids." At 32, Oliver had been doing well as a software engineer, but the down payment for the colonial-style home was still beyond his reach. Without hesitation, Laura had offered to help. "I have some money set aside from Dad's life insurance," she had told him. "I want you to have it." The memory of Oliver's grateful embrace warmed her heart. Even now, she had withdrawn $40,000 from her retirement savings, a significant portion of her security, to help her only child achieve his dream. James Donovan, her attorney, had insisted on making it official. "A promissory note, Laura," he had advised. "It protects everyone involved." Oliver had readily agreed. "Of course, Mom. I want to pay you back. This should be official." The agreement was simple: $40,000 to be repaid with 5% annual interest, payments to begin 1 year after purchase. The loan was secured by the property itself. Laura had never imagined that the document would become so important. Heading inside, she glanced at the calendar where she'd marked her part-time schedule at Robinson Accounting, where she worked as a bookkeeper 3 days a week. Not because she needed to; her Social Security and modest pension covered her basic needs, but because she enjoyed the routine and the company of her colleagues. The mantelpiece held a collection of photographs chronicling Oliver's life: his high school graduation, his college commencement, and his wedding to Isabella 3 years ago. Laura paused at the wedding photo, studying her daughter-in-law's perfect smile. Isabella Green had been beautiful, poised, and charming on that day. Laura had tried to ignore the discomfort she felt when Isabella had dismissed her suggestion about the wedding flowers with a patronizing pat on the arm. "Oh, Laura, those arrangements are so traditional. We're going for something more sophisticated." 3 years later, Laura still couldn't pinpoint exactly when things had changed, but she knew they had. Her relationship with her son had shifted in subtle yet undeniable ways since Isabella entered his life. The sound of her phone ringing interrupted her thoughts. For a moment, her heart lifted. Perhaps it was Oliver, but the caller ID showed her friend Margaret from the community center. "Laura, are you still coming to the book club tomorrow? We're discussing that mystery novel you recommended." "Yes, of course. I wouldn't miss it," Laura replied, pushing aside her disappointment. After hanging up, Laura moved to her small kitchen to prepare lunch, wondering when she would hear from her son again. The last time they'd spoken, his voice had sounded strained, and he'd cut the call short when Isabella entered the room. Laura Jackson had always prided herself on her strength and independence. She'd raised a wonderful son, maintained a beautiful home, and created a life for herself after losing her husband. But lately, a nagging worry had settled in her chest, a feeling that something wasn't right in her son's life, and that the carefully crafted distance between them was not merely a consequence of his busy schedule. Little did she know that her peaceful world was about to be shattered completely. The first warning sign had appeared at Oliver and Isabella's wedding reception. Laura had overheard a conversation between Isabella and her maid of honor, Alexis Moore, that had left her feeling uneasy. "Just wait until we redecorate that house," Isabella had whispered. "Oliver thinks we're keeping it simple, but I've already picked out Italian marble for the countertops. Can you afford that?" Alexis had asked. Isabella's laugh had been light but calculated. "Oliver's company is doing well, and his mother helped with the down payment. Besides, what's the point of having a beautiful home if you don't showcase it properly?" Laura had pretended not to hear, focusing instead on adjusting the centerpiece at her table. But the conversation had stayed with her. It wasn't the desire for beautiful things that bothered her. It was the dismissive way Isabella spoke about Oliver's wishes and the casual mention of Laura's financial help. As the months passed after the wedding, Laura noticed other concerning patterns. Oliver began missing family gatherings he'd never missed before. The first Thanksgiving without him had been particularly painful. "I'm sorry, Mom," he'd said over the phone. "Isabella's planned a dinner with some potential clients. It could really help her interior design business take off." Laura had spent that Thanksgiving with Ellen and Marcus Thompson, grateful for their kindness, but missing her son terribly. It was the first major holiday she'd spent without Oliver since Thomas died. Then came the canceled weekend visits, the shortened phone calls, and the gradual disconnection from friends Oliver had known since childhood. Mike Anderson, Oliver's best friend since high school, had called Laura one day, concerned. "Have you noticed anything different about Oliver?" he'd asked. "We were supposed to go fishing last weekend, something we've done every spring for 15 years, but he canceled at the last minute. Said Isabella needed him to attend some networking event." Laura had acknowledged her own concerns, but defended her son. "He's just busy, Mike. Marriage changes things." But she knew it was more than that. Oliver had always balanced his relationships well, making time for family, friends, and work. This systematic isolation was new and troubling. One evening, after a particularly brief and stilted phone conversation with her son, Laura had found herself looking through old photo albums. Pictures of Oliver growing up playing baseball, graduating high school. Laughing with his father filled her with a profound sense of loss, not for the boy he had been, but for the relationship they once shared. Isabella's background had never seemed particularly concerning. She came from a middle-class family in Indianapolis, had studied design at a respectable state university, and worked for a small interior design firm when she met Oliver. Her parents, according to Oliver, were quiet, unassuming people who had moved to Florida shortly after the wedding. "They're not big on staying in touch," Oliver had explained when Laura asked why they never visited. "They prefer their own space." Perhaps that explained Isabella's approach to family if she hadn't been raised to value close family ties. She might not understand their importance to Oliver and Laura, but something in Laura's gut told her there was more to it than different family cultures. The way Isabella's eyes calculated the value of everything around her, the subtle put-downs disguised as jokes, the increasing control over Oliver's schedule and finances all pointed to something more deliberate. The missed payments on the promissory note should have been another red flag. The first payment had been due exactly 1 year after Oliver and Isabella purchased their home, when it didn't arrive. Laura had gently reminded Oliver during a phone call. "Oh, Mom, I'm so sorry," he'd said, sounding genuinely contrite. "Things have been tight with all the new furniture and Isabella's car needed repairs. Can I get it to you next month?" Next month had become next quarter. Then eventually, the subject stopped being mentioned altogether. Laura hadn't pressed the issue, not wanting to strain their already fragile relationship. It was just money, after all, and Oliver was her son. She trusted him to make good on his promise eventually. But as 1 year of missed payments became 2, then 3, Laura began to worry not just about the money, but about what it represented. Oliver had always been responsible and true to his word. His failure to honor this commitment seemed symptomatic of a larger problem. The most alarming incident occurred 6 months ago, when Laura had driven to Oliver and Isabella's home unannounced, hoping to surprise Oliver for his birthday with his favorite homemade cake. Isabella had answered the door, her smile freezing when she saw Laura. Laura, what a surprise. Oliver's not home. He's working late. Oh, I thought I'd leave this cake for him, Laura had said, holding up the carefully packaged chocolate cake she'd spent the morning baking. Isabella had taken the cake with barely concealed annoyance. That's thoughtful. But Oliver's watching his carbs these days, and we really prefer if people call before visiting. Laura had apologized and left, feeling like an intruder rather than family. As she drove away, she'd glanced in her rearview mirror and seen Isabella tossing the cake into the trash bin at the curb. That night, Oliver had called to thank her for remembering his birthday, but made no mention of the cake. When Laura asked if he'd enjoyed it, there was a pause before he answered. It was delicious, Mom, just like I remember. The lie had hurt more than Isabella throwing away the cake. It confirmed what Laura had suspected. Oliver was caught in a web of deception, one strand of which involved keeping his mother at a distance. The final straw came when Oliver missed the anniversary of his father's death, something they had always commemorated together, visiting Thomas's grave and then having lunch at his favorite restaurant. Laura had waited at the cemetery for over an hour before accepting that Oliver wasn't coming. When she called him later, Isabella had answered. Oh, Laura, I'm so sorry. Oliver has a terrible migraine today. He can't possibly drive or talk. I'll have him call you tomorrow. But Oliver hadn't called the next day, or the day after. When he finally did reach out, his apology had sounded rehearsed. Mom, I'm really sorry about missing Dad's anniversary. Work has been crazy, and I've been dealing with these migraines. Laura had wanted to confront him, to ask why he was lying, to demand to know what was happening in his life that was causing this rift between them. But she'd held back, fearing that pushing too hard would only drive him further away. It's all right, sweetheart, she'd said instead. We'll do it next year. As she hung up the phone, Laura had stared at the photo of Thomas on her bedside table. Something's wrong. Tom? She'd whispered to her late husband's image. I don't know what to do. She couldn't have known then that the answers to her questions would come soon enough, in a way that would shake the foundations of her world and test the limits of her strength and love. The Tuesday morning in October began like any other. Laura was in her garden, pruning her roses and enjoying the crisp autumn air. The vibrant red and pink blooms were particularly beautiful this year, a small triumph that gave her immense satisfaction. The sound of a car engine disturbed the tranquility. Laura recognized the familiar hum of Oliver's SUV even before she saw it pull into her driveway. Something about the abrupt way the car doors slammed sent a ripple of unease through her, setting down her pruning shears. Laura wiped her hands on her gardening apron and made her way around to the front of the house. The sight that greeted her stopped her in her tracks. Oliver stood on her porch, his normally neat appearance disheveled. His tie hung loosely around his neck, and dark circles shadowed his eyes. Beside him stood Isabella, immaculately dressed as always, her blonde hair styled to perfection despite the early hour. But it was the luggage surrounding them that truly alarmed Laura. 2 large suitcases beside Isabella, and more bags still in the trunk of the SUV. Mom, Oliver called out, his voice strained. We need to talk. Laura unlocked her front door with hands that suddenly felt cold. What's going on? Is everything all right? They followed her inside, their footsteps echoing on her hardwood floors. Laura noticed Isabella's sharp eyes scanning the living room, taking inventory of the furniture and decorations as if calculating their worth. Mom, we have something to tell you, Oliver began, settling heavily into the old recliner, the same chair where Thomas used to sit before he passed away. Laura poured herself a cup of coffee from the pot she'd made earlier that morning, her hand steady despite the growing unease in her chest. I'm listening. Oliver glanced at Isabella, who gave him an almost imperceptible nod. We sold the house. The words hung in the air like smoke. Laura set her coffee cup down carefully, the ceramic making a soft clink against the saucer. Which house? She asked, though something deep in her stomach already knew the answer. Our house, he said. The one on Maple Avenue. Laura felt as if all the air had been sucked from the room. The beautiful colonial she had helped them buy. The house where she'd contributed $40,000 from her retirement savings for the down payment. The house where she'd spent countless weekends helping them renovate painting walls until her back ached, planting the garden that Isabella had never appreciated. You sold it. Laura's voice came out smaller than she intended. Why didn't you tell me you were thinking about selling? Isabella spoke for the first time since entering Laura's home. We didn't need permission. Laura, it's our house. Her tone was cool, matter of fact, but there was something else there, something that made Laura's skin crawl. I understand it's your house, Laura said carefully. But we discussed your plans to stay there long term. You said it was perfect for raising the children you wanted to have. Oliver shifted uncomfortably. Plans change. Mom, how much did you get for it? Laura asked. $620,000, Isabella answered before Oliver could speak. There was something almost gleeful in her voice, like she was sharing exciting news. Laura's breath caught. $620,000. It was more than she'd made in the last 10 years of working before retirement. That's wonderful, she managed. So, where are you moving? Did you find a bigger place, somewhere in a better school district? The silence that followed was deafening. Oliver stared at his hands. Isabella examined her perfectly manicured nails. Actually, Mom, Oliver finally said, we were hoping we could stay here with you, just temporarily while we figure things out. Laura blinked, certain she'd misheard. Stay here. It would just be for a little while. He rushed to explain. Maybe a few months. We wouldn't be any trouble. But what happened to the money from the sale? Laura asked. Another silence followed, heavier and more dangerous than the first. Well, Isabella said, smoothing her skirt. I had some expenses. Things I needed to take care of. What kind of expenses? Personal things, she said, her tone suggesting the conversation was over, but Laura wasn't ready to let it go. Isabella, you just sold a house for over $600,000. What could possibly— I bought some jewelry, Isabella interrupted. And some clothes. I got my car detailed and upgraded the interior. I also took a spa trip to California with my sister. Oh, and I paid off my credit cards. Laura stared at her, waiting for her to continue, to explain where the rest of the money went. When she didn't, Laura felt something cold settle in her chest. How much jewelry? She asked quietly. Does it matter? Isabella snapped. It was my money to spend. Your money. The words slipped out before Laura could stop them. Oliver finally looked up. Mom, please, we just need a place to stay while we get back on our feet. Get back on your feet, Laura repeated. Oliver, you just had over $500,000. How are you not on your feet? It's complicated, he mumbled. Laura looked between her son and his wife, seeing them clearly for perhaps the first time. Oliver, her boy whom she'd raised to be responsible, to think before acting, was sitting in her living room homeless, despite having just had more money than most people see in a lifetime. And Isabella, who had never worked a day since marrying her son, was sitting there in what looked like a brand new outfit that probably cost more than Laura's monthly Social Security check. Where did all the money go, Isabella? Laura asked again, her voice firmer this time. Isabella rolled her eyes. I told you I had expenses. $620,000 worth of expenses. It's not your business. Laura, something snapped inside Laura. It became my business when you showed up at my door asking for a place to live. Oliver put his head in his hands. Mom, please don't make this harder than it has to be. Harder than it has to be? Laura stood up, her coffee forgotten. Oliver, help me understand this. You had a beautiful house, money in the bank, and now you're asking to move in with your 64-year-old mother because your wife spent it all on jewelry and spa trips. It wasn't just jewelry and spa trips, Isabella said defensively. I had debts to pay off. What debts? Credit card debts. How much? Isabella glared at her. Enough. Laura felt like she was drowning. She looked at her son. How much debt did she have? Oliver. Oliver sighed deeply. $80,000 in credit card debt. Laura felt dizzy. What did she buy with $80,000 on credit cards? Clothes mostly, he said quietly. Shoes, handbags, vacations before we were married. And the rest of the money from the house. Oliver looked at Isabella, who was now studying her phone as if this conversation didn't concern her. She wanted to redecorate her sister's house as a surprise, he said, and she bought a new car for her mother, and she wanted to invest in her friend's business. What kind of business? A boutique, Isabella said without looking up from her phone. It's going to be very successful. How much did you invest? $300,000. The number hit Laura like a physical blow. $300,000 invested in a friend's boutique by a woman who had never run a business, never held a job, never shown any interest in anything beyond shopping and spa treatments. So let me get this straight, Laura said, her voice barely above a whisper. You sold your house for $620,000. $80,000 went to pay off Isabella's credit card debts. $300,000 went to invest in her friend's boutique. What happened to the rest? I told you, Isabella said, finally looking up from her phone with irritation. I had expenses, the jewelry, the spa trips, the car detailing, some furniture for the boutique, gifts for my family. Things add up. Laura calculated quickly in her head. Even being generous with Isabella's expenses, there should have been at least $150,000 left, maybe more. Where's the rest of the money? She asked. There is no rest, Isabella said. It's gone. Gone. Over $600,000 gone in a matter of months on jewelry, spa trips, credit card debts, and a boutique investment that Laura was willing to bet would never see a profit. Laura sank back into her chair, feeling every one of her 64 years settling into her bones. This wasn't just about money. This was about the son she'd raised, the values she'd tried to instill in him, and the woman who had somehow convinced him to throw it all away. So now you want to live here, Laura said. Just temporarily, Oliver repeated. Laura looked around her small home, 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, a tiny kitchen. She'd worked for 30 years to pay off this house, to have a place that was hers, where she could live out her retirement in peace. And what's your plan? She asked. How do you intend to get back on your feet? Oliver and Isabella exchanged a look. Well, Isabella said, Oliver will keep working, obviously, and I'm sure the boutique will start turning a profit soon. And if it doesn't, she shrugged, then we'll figure something else out. Laura stared at this woman who had convinced her son to sell his house and spend over $500,000 in a few months, and who was now sitting in her living room with the casual confidence of someone who expected to be taken care of. No, Laura said quietly. What? Oliver looked up sharply. I said no. You can't stay here. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. The word no hung in the air between them like a challenge. Laura watched her son's face crumble, but it was Isabella's reaction that truly unsettled her. Her perfectly composed mask slipped for just a moment, revealing something cold and calculating underneath. Mom, you can't be serious, Oliver said, his voice rising. We're family. Yes, we are family, Laura replied, her voice steadier than she felt, which is why I'm not going to enable this disaster you've created. Isabella set her phone down on Laura's coffee table with deliberate force. Enable what disaster, Laura? My husband made a business decision. Not every investment pays off immediately. Business decision. Laura couldn't keep the incredulity out of her voice. Spending $600,000 on jewelry, spa trips, and your friend's boutique is not a business decision, Isabella. It's reckless spending. How dare you judge how I spend my money, she snapped, her composure finally cracking. It wasn't your money, Laura said quietly. It was the equity in a house that my son worked for, that I helped purchase. Oliver stood up abruptly, pacing to Laura's front window. Mom, we wouldn't ask if we had anywhere else to go. What about Isabella's family? Surely her parents live in a 1-bedroom condo, Oliver said. And her sister doesn't have room. The sister whose house she spent thousands redecorating as a surprise. Isabella's eyes flashed with anger. My personal relationships are none of your concern. Laura stood up, her patience finally exhausted. They became my concern the moment you showed up at my door asking for help. You spent my son's future on frivolous nonsense. And now you expect me to clean up the mess. It's not frivolous, Isabella shouted, jumping to her feet. You wouldn't understand. You've lived in this tiny house your whole life, wearing the same old clothes, driving the same old car. You don't know what it's like to have standards." The insult hit its mark, but Laura refused to show it. "No, Isabella, I don't know what it's like to spend other people's money on luxuries while expecting them to provide me with housing when the money runs out." Oliver turned from the window. His face flushed. "Mom, please. I know Isabella made some mistakes." "Some mistakes," Laura interrupted. "Oliver, she spent over $600,000 in a few months. This isn't some mistake. This is a pattern of behavior." "You don't know anything about our marriage," Isabella hissed. "I know what it's like to live within my means," Laura replied. "I know what it's like to save for the things I want instead of expecting others to pay for them." Isabella's face twisted with rage. "Well, aren't you just perfect? Laura, the perfect mother who raised the perfect son who married the wrong woman?" "I never said that." "You didn't have to. It's written all over your face every time you look at me." The truth was, Isabella was partially right. Laura had never liked Isabella from the moment Oliver brought her home 3 years ago. But it wasn't because of her background or her appearance. It was because of moments like this, when her mask slipped and revealed the entitled, manipulative person underneath. "Isabella," Laura said carefully, "I don't dislike you because of who you are. I dislike the choices you make and how they affect my son." "Your son is a grown man who makes his own choices," Isabella shot back. "Really, because from where I'm standing, it looks like you make all the choices and he just goes along with them." Oliver finally spoke up, his voice strained. "Mom, that's not fair, isn't it? Tell me, Oliver, whose idea was it to sell the house?" He hesitated. "It was. We discussed it together." "Whose idea was it to invest $300,000 in a boutique?" Another hesitation. "Isabella thought it was a good opportunity." "Whose idea was it to spend $80,000 paying off credit card debts that you didn't even know existed until after you were married?" Oliver's face reddened, but he didn't answer. "Answer the question. Oliver, who's been making the financial decisions in your marriage?" "We make them together," he said weakly. Isabella laughed, a harsh sound that echoed off Laura's living room walls. "Oh, please, Oliver, tell your mother the truth. Tell her how you begged me to marry you. Tell her how grateful you were that someone like me would even look at someone like you." Laura felt her blood run cold. "Someone like you." "Yes, Laura," Isabella said, her voice dripping with venom. "Someone beautiful, someone sophisticated, someone who could have had any man she wanted. Your son knows he hit the lottery when he married me." Laura looked at Oliver, waiting for him to defend himself, to show some backbone. Instead, he stared at the floor, his shoulders slumped in defeat. "And now," Isabella continued, "when we need help, his own mother turns her back on us. What kind of mother does that? The kind who won't watch her son be destroyed by a manipulative woman," Laura said, her voice rising despite her efforts to stay calm. That's when Isabella crossed the line. "You bitter old woman," she screamed. "You're just jealous because your son chose me over you. You can't stand that he loves me more than he loves his pathetic, lonely mother." "Isabella, stop," Oliver said, but his voice lacked conviction. "No, I won't stop. She needs to hear this. You're a miserable old lady living in a rundown house, jealous of everyone who has more than you do. Well, guess what? Laura, your son doesn't need you anymore. He has me." Laura felt something snap inside her. All the years of biting her tongue, of trying to be diplomatic, of watching this woman slowly poison her relationship with her son, it all came crashing down. "Get out," she said quietly. "What, Ben?" I said. "Get out of my house." Isabella laughed. "You can't throw us out. We have nowhere to go. That's not my problem." "Mom," Oliver pleaded, "please reconsider. We really have nowhere else. You should have thought of that before you let your wife spend your entire future on jewelry and spa treatments." Isabella stepped closer to Laura, her face twisted with fury. "You don't get to talk to me like that in front of my husband." "This is my house," Laura said firmly. "I'll talk to you however I want, and right now, I want you to leave." "We're not going anywhere," Isabella said, crossing her arms. "Oliver, Tell your mother we're staying." Laura looked at her son, this man she'd raised to stand up for what was right, to protect the people he loved. Instead, she saw a broken person who had let his wife walk all over him for so long that he didn't remember how to fight back. "Oliver," she said softly, "please ask your wife to leave my home." He looked between them, his face anguished. "Mom, please just let us stay for a few days while we figure something out." "No." That's when Isabella lost whatever remaining composure she had. "Fine," she screamed. "You want to be a selfish, heartless, then we'll make sure everyone knows exactly what kind of mother you are." She stormed toward Laura's front door, yanking it open so hard it banged against the wall. Laura's neighbors, Ellen Thompson from across the street and the Johnsons from next door, were outside in their yards. They looked up at the commotion. "You want to know what kind of woman Laura Jackson really is?" Isabella shouted, her voice carrying across the quiet street. "She's throwing her own son out on the street. Her own flesh and blood." Laura felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment as neighbors stopped what they were doing to stare at the scene unfolding on her front porch. "Isabella, please," Oliver said, finally showing some backbone, but it was too late. "No," she screamed. "Let them all know. This woman raised a son who worked his whole life to buy a beautiful home, and when life got a little difficult, when we needed help, she slammed the door in our faces." Ellen Thompson took a step closer, clearly trying to hear every word. "We asked for temporary help," Isabella continued, tears now streaming down her face, tears Laura was sure were completely calculated. "Just a place to stay while we got back on our feet. And this heartless woman said no to her own child." Laura stood in her doorway watching this performance, feeling more humiliated than she had in years. Her quiet street, where she'd lived for 15 years, where her neighbors respected her, was now witness to this spectacle. "That's enough," she said, stepping out onto her porch. "No, it's not enough." Isabella whirled around to face her. "You think you're so much better than everyone else, but you're just a selfish old woman who can't stand to see other people happy. Isabella, stop this right now." "Why? Because you're embarrassed." "Good. You should be embarrassed." That's when she did something that changed everything. In front of Laura's neighbors, in front of God and everyone, Isabella Green raised her hand and slapped Laura across the face. The sound echoed across the quiet street like a gunshot. Laura staggered back, her hand flying to her cheek, more from shock than pain. For a moment, nobody moved. Even Isabella seemed surprised by what she'd done. Ellen Thompson gasped audibly. Marcus Johnson, who had been mowing their lawn, shut off the mower and stared. Laura looked at her son, waiting for him to defend her, to show some outrage that his wife had just assaulted his mother. Instead, Oliver stood there looking confused and overwhelmed. "Did you just hit me?" Laura asked quietly, her voice steady despite the rage building in her chest. Isabella lifted her chin defiantly. "You deserved it. Throwing your own family out on the street like common trash." Laura looked around at her neighbors, all of them witnessing this humiliation. Ellen looked horrified. The Johnsons were whispering to each other. Even the mail carrier had stopped his truck to watch. "Oliver," Laura said, her voice barely above a whisper, "your wife just assaulted me in front of the entire neighborhood." He opened his mouth as if to speak, then closed it again. "And you're going to stand there and let her—" "Mom, she's upset. She didn't mean to slap me in the face." Isabella stepped between them. "Don't try to make this about you being a victim. Laura, you brought this on yourself." Laura stared at this woman who had just humiliated her in front of her neighbors, who had convinced her son to throw away his financial future, and who was now trying to make her the villain in her twisted narrative. "Get off my property," she said quietly. "Make me," Isabella sneered. Laura looked at her son one last time, hoping to see some sign that he would stand up to Isabella, that he would choose right over wrong. Instead, she saw a man who had been so thoroughly manipulated that he couldn't even defend his own mother from physical assault. "You have 5 minutes to get your bags and get off my property," Laura said. "If you're not gone by then, I'm calling the police." "You wouldn't dare," Isabella said, but Laura could see uncertainty creeping into her eyes. Laura pulled her cell phone from her pocket and dialed 911. As the phone rang, she watched Isabella's face change from defiance to panic. She grabbed Oliver's arm. "Tell your mother to hang up that phone right now," she hissed. But Laura was already talking to the dispatcher, giving her address, explaining that she needed an officer to help remove trespassers from her property who had become violent. When she hung up, Isabella was staring at her in disbelief. "You actually called the police on your own son?" "No," Laura said calmly. "I called the police on the woman who just assaulted me in front of witnesses." For the first time since Laura had known her, Isabella Green looked genuinely afraid. The police arrived within 10 minutes, though it felt like an eternity. Officer Rachel Martinez was a young woman, maybe in her early 30s, with kind eyes and a professional demeanor that immediately put Laura at ease. Officer Michael Wilson, her partner, was older, probably close to Laura's age, with gray temples and the weary look of someone who'd seen too much family drama over the years. By the time they arrived, Isabella had managed to compose herself somewhat. She'd stopped crying and fixed her hair, but Laura could see the panic still lurking in her eyes. Oliver stood beside his luggage, looking like a lost child. "Ma'am," Officer Martinez said, approaching Laura first. "We received a call about an assault." "Yes," Laura said, pointing to her still stinging cheek. "This woman slapped me." Officer Wilson looked at Isabella. "Is this true, ma'am?" "She was being unreasonable," Isabella said, as if that justified physical violence. "We just needed a place to stay temporarily, and she threw us out like we were strangers." "That doesn't give you the right to hit anyone," Officer Martinez said firmly. She turned back to Laura. "Ma'am, do you want to press charges?" Laura looked at her son, standing there with his head down, saying nothing in her defense. This man she had raised, sacrificed for, loved unconditionally. And he couldn't even condemn his wife for hitting his mother. "Yes," she said quietly. "I want to press charges." Isabella's face went white. "You can't be serious. Assault is a serious charge, ma'am," Officer Wilson said. "We have multiple witnesses who saw you strike Mrs. Jackson." Indeed, Laura's neighbors were still standing in their yards watching the drama unfold. Ellen Thompson nodded vigorously when Officer Martinez looked in her direction. "I saw the whole thing," Ellen called out. "She hit Laura right across the face, unprovoked." "This is ridiculous," Isabella protested. "She's my mother-in-law. This is a family dispute." "Family or not," Officer Martinez said, "assault is assault. You'll need to come with us." As they led Isabella toward the patrol car, she turned back to Oliver. "Don't just stand there. Do something." But Oliver seemed frozen, watching his wife being arrested on his mother's front lawn. He looked at Laura with something that might have been accusation. "Mom, did you really have to—" "Yes," Laura said before he could finish. "I really had to. Your wife assaulted me in front of the entire neighborhood, and you stood there and did nothing. She's your wife, and I'm your mother." But apparently that doesn't mean anything anymore. Officer Wilson approached with a clipboard. "Mrs. Jackson, we'll need you to come down to the station to give a formal statement." "Can you do that this afternoon?" "Of course." As the police car pulled away with Isabella in the back seat, Oliver loaded his luggage back into his SUV. He moved slowly, like a man in shock. "Where will you go?" Laura asked. "Despite everything." He shrugged. "I don't know. Maybe a hotel for tonight." "With what money?" The question hung in the air between them. They both knew he couldn't afford a hotel indefinitely. They both knew this was just the beginning of his problems. "Oliver," Laura said softly, "this doesn't have to be the end. If you leave her, if you admit that this whole situation is wrong, we can work through this." He looked at her with tired eyes. "She's my wife. Mom, I can't just abandon her." "She abandoned you the moment she spent your future on jewelry and spa trips. It's not that simple." "Yes, it is. It's exactly that simple." He climbed into his SUV without another word and drove away, leaving Laura standing on her front porch, feeling more alone than she had since Thomas died. The rest of the day passed in a blur. Laura gave her statement at the police station, detailing not just the assault but the entire confrontation. The officer taking her statement, Detective Melissa Reynolds, was thorough and professional. "Mrs. Jackson," she said when they were finished, "I have to ask, is this the first time your daughter-in-law has been physically aggressive with you?" Laura considered the question. "Yes, physically, but she's been emotionally manipulative for years." "Can you elaborate on that?" Laura told her about the gradual isolation from her son, how Isabella always seemed to schedule their visits during times she knew Laura couldn't make it, how she'd convinced Oliver to skip family gatherings and holidays. She explained how Isabella had slowly turned her son against her, making him believe that his mother was overly critical and interfering. Then there was the financial situation. "You mentioned that they sold their house and spent the money, over $600,000, Detective Reynolds asked. "Yes," Laura said. "Gone in a matter of months." Detective Reynolds whistled low. "That's a lot of money to go through that quickly. She has expensive tastes and no concept of living within her means." "And your son went along with this?" Laura sighed. "My son has been completely manipulated by this woman. He can't see what she's doing to him, to his future, to our family." That evening, alone in her house, Laura sat at her kitchen table with a cup of tea and really thought about her situation for the first time. Pressing charges against Isabella was just the beginning. She would be back. They would both be back. And next time they might not be so direct about their demands. Laura thought about the house on Maple Avenue, the one she'd helped them buy, $40,000 from her retirement savings money she'd worked decades to accumulate, money that had essentially been flushed away along with the rest of their equity. But then she remembered something. When they'd bought the house, there had been paperwork, lots of paperwork. And because she'd contributed such a significant portion of the down payment, the real estate attorney had insisted on certain protections. Laura went to her file cabinet and pulled out the folder labeled Oliver House Purchase. Inside were copies of all the documents from the sale, including something she'd nearly forgotten about a promissory note. The attorney had insisted on it when she'd given them the $40,000. "Mrs. Jackson," he'd said at the time, "I strongly recommend that this be structured as a loan rather than a gift. It protects your interests and ensures that your son understands the gravity of accepting such a large sum." At the time, Laura had protested. She didn't want to make it a loan. She wanted to help her son. But Oliver himself had insisted, "Mom, I want to pay you back. This should be official." The promissory note was clear $40,000 to be repaid at 5% annual interest, with payments beginning 1 year after the purchase date. The loan was secured by the property itself, meaning Laura had a legal interest in the house. But they'd sold the house without paying her back, without even mentioning the outstanding loan. Laura picked up her phone and dialed the number for James Donovan, the attorney who'd handled the original purchase. His secretary told her he could see her the next morning. That night, Laura barely slept. She kept thinking about Oliver as a little boy, how he used to crawl into her bed during thunderstorms, how proud he'd been when he'd graduated from college, how he'd cried at his father's funeral and promised he'd always take care of her. Where had that boy gone? How had he become this man who stood silent while his wife assaulted his mother? The next morning, Laura dressed carefully in her best suit and drove to James Donovan's office. He was a distinguished man in his 60s with silver hair and the kind of presence that commanded respect. "Mrs. Jackson," he said, shaking her hand warmly, "I was sorry to hear about your troubles. Please sit down and tell me what's happened." Laura explained the entire situation: the house sale, the squandered money, the assault, the arrest. James listened without interruption, occasionally making notes on a legal pad. When she finished, he leaned back in his chair and studied her carefully. "Laura," he said, "do you understand that you have significant legal recourse here?" "What do you mean?" "The promissory note securing your $40,000 loan was recorded as a lien against the property. When your son sold this house without satisfying that debt, he violated the terms of the note. You have grounds for both breach of contract and conversion." Laura felt a flutter of something in her chest, not quite hope, but something stronger than resignation. "What does that mean in practical terms?" "It means you can sue for the full amount of the loan plus interest plus damages, and because the debt was secured by real property, you may be able to attach other assets to satisfy the judgment." What other assets? James smiled grimly. Well, let's see what your son and daughter-in-law have left after their spending spree. Over the next hour, James explained Laura's options in detail. She could file a civil lawsuit seeking repayment of the loan, plus interest and damages. She could also pursue criminal charges for theft by conversion, since they'd sold property that was partially hers without her consent. But James, Laura said, I don't want to destroy my son's life. I just want him to understand that actions have consequences. Sometimes, Laura, the kindest thing you can do for someone you love is to stop protecting them from the consequences of their choices. Laura thought about that as she drove home. Was she protecting Oliver by allowing Isabella to manipulate him? Was she enabling his poor decisions by always being there to catch him when he fell? By the time she got home, she'd made her decision. She called James Donovan and told him to file the lawsuit not just against Isabella, but against both of them. They were married. They'd made the decision together to sell the house, and they would face the consequences together. Then she did something else. She called a locksmith and had all her locks changed. She installed a security system with cameras that would record anyone who approached her property. She wasn't going to be caught off guard again. That afternoon, Oliver called. Mom, Isabella made bail. We need to talk. No, we don't. Mom, please. She's sorry about hitting you. She was just upset. Oliver, your wife stole $40,000 from me and then assaulted me when I refused to house you both after you squandered over $500,000. There's nothing to talk about. What do you mean, stole $40,000? Laura explained about the promissory note, about the lien on the house, about the lawsuit she'd filed that morning. The silence on the other end of the phone stretched so long, Laura thought he might have hung up. Mom, he finally said, his voice shaking. You can't sue us. We're family. You're right, Oliver. We are family, which is why what you did hurt so much worse than if a stranger had stolen from me. We didn't steal from you. You sold a house that had a $40,000 lien on it without paying me back. What would you call that? Another long silence. How much are you suing for? $40,000 plus 3 years of interest plus legal fees plus damages for conversion and breach of contract. My attorney estimates the total at around $67,000. We don't have $67,000. You should have thought of that before you let your wife spend your entire future on jewelry and spa treatments. Mom, please, can't we work something out? Maybe we can pay you back slowly over time. You mean like the original promissory note said, the one you ignored for 3 years before selling the house? Laura could hear him breathing heavily on the other end of the phone. Where are you staying? She asked. A motel, the cheapest one we could find. How long can you afford to stay there? Maybe a week? 2 weeks if we're careful. And then what? I don't know. Mom, I really don't know. For a moment, Laura almost weakened. This was her son, her baby, and he sounded so lost and scared. But then she remembered Isabella's hand striking her face, and her resolve strengthened. Oliver, I love you. I have always loved you, and I always will, but I will not be manipulated, stolen from, or assaulted. If you want a relationship with me, you need to take responsibility for your choices and the consequences that come with them. What does that mean? It means you need to decide what's more important to you, your relationship with your wife or your relationship with your mother, because right now, you can't have both. Laura hung up before he could respond, her hands shaking as she set the phone down. Outside, the sun was setting over her quiet neighborhood. Ellen Thompson was watering her flowers, and Marcus Johnson was riding his bicycle in circles in their driveway. Everything looked normal, peaceful, but Laura knew that nothing would ever be normal again. Tomorrow, Oliver and Isabella would receive the legal papers. They would realize that their actions had real consequences, and Laura would find out once and for all whether the son she'd raised still existed somewhere inside the man Isabella had created. 3 days after Laura filed the lawsuit, James Donovan called with news that made her blood run cold. Laura, I need you to sit down, he said, his normally steady voice laced with concern. Laura lowered herself into her kitchen chair, gripping the phone tighter. What is it, James? My investigator has been looking into your daughter-in-law's background, and we've uncovered some things you need to know. When James had suggested hiring a private investigator named Patricia Chen to look into Isabella's background, Laura had initially hesitated. It felt invasive, almost underhanded, but after what had happened on her front porch, she had agreed. Now, she braced herself for what he'd discovered. What kind of things? Isabella has a pattern of this behavior. Before she married your son, she was engaged to 2 other men. Both relationships ended when the men discovered she'd been using their credit cards without permission. In one case, she ran up over $50,000 in debt before the man found out. Laura's heart sank. Does Oliver know this? I don't think so. She's very good at covering her tracks. Laura closed her eyes, imagining how Oliver would react to this information. Would he even believe it? But there's more. James continued. The boutique she invested in it doesn't exist. What do you mean it doesn't exist? My investigator couldn't find any business license, any storefront, any evidence that this boutique is anything more than a way for her friend Alexis Moore to get $300,000 for free. Laura felt sick. So the money is just gone. It appears so. She leaned back in her chair, the full magnitude of the deception washing over her. Oliver hadn't just married a spendthrift. He'd married a con artist. And Laura? James hesitated. There's something else. Something worse. Laura braced herself. Tell me. She's been having an affair for at least 6 months. Possibly longer. The kitchen seemed to tilt around Laura. An affair. The man is married, wealthy, and she's been using your son's money to fund their relationship. The expensive jewelry, the spa trips, the car detailing it was all part of maintaining her relationship with this other man. Laura gripped the edge of the table to steady herself. Her son, her decent, hard-working son, had been completely destroyed by a woman who was using him as an ATM while cheating on him with someone else. Does Oliver know about the affair? I don't believe so. But Laura, the man she's been seeing, Robert Hawkins, he's ending the relationship. My investigator spoke to his wife, who found out about the affair and gave him an ultimatum. That's why Isabella is suddenly desperate for money and a place to stay. Laura realized. Her sugar daddy cut her off. Exactly. Laura closed her eyes, processing this information. Everything made sense now, the sudden urgency to sell the house, the reckless spending spree, the desperation when Laura refused to let them stay with her. Isabella wasn't just irresponsible with money. She was a predator who had systematically destroyed Oliver's life to fund her affair. What do we do with this information? Laura asked. We use it, James said firmly. In the lawsuit, we can argue that the money was obtained through fraud and deception. We can also use it to ensure your son understands exactly who he married. That afternoon, the process server delivered the legal papers to the motel where Oliver and Isabella were staying. Laura knew because Oliver called her 30 minutes later, his voice shaking with rage. Mom, what the hell is this? It's a lawsuit. Oliver, I told you I was going to file it. $67,000. You're suing us for $67,000. That's what you owe me plus interest, plus legal fees, plus damages. We don't have $67,000. I know, Laura said. That's what happens when you steal from family to fund a lifestyle you can't afford. We didn't steal from you. Oliver, you sold a house that had a $40,000 lien on it without paying me back. In legal terms, that's conversion of secured property. Laura could hear Isabella in the background, screaming something she couldn't quite make out. She wants to know if you've lost your mind, Oliver relayed. Tell your wife that I'm completely sane. I'm also completely done being stolen from and assaulted. Mom, please, can't we work something out? Maybe we can… No, Oliver. The time for working things out was 3 years ago when you first missed a payment on the promissory note, or it was 6 months ago when you decided to sell the house. Or it was last week when you showed up at my door asking for help after squandering over $500,000. The time for working things out has passed. What do you want us to do? We're living in a motel. I want you to get jobs and start taking responsibility for the mess you've made. Isabella can't work. She's never had a job. Then it's time for her to learn. Mom, you don't understand. She's not capable of working some minimum wage job. She's what? Oliver, too good to work, too special to contribute to her own survival. The silence stretched between them. Finally, Oliver spoke, his voice quieter now. She says she'll countersue, for emotional distress or something. Laura almost laughed. Let her try. I have witnesses to her assaulting me, and I have documentation of every dollar she stole. What does she have more screaming in the background? Then Oliver came back on the line. She wants to know why you're doing this to us. Because you both need to learn that actions have consequences. Laura paused, considering whether to reveal what the investigator had uncovered. And Oliver, there's something else you need to know about your wife. What? Laura hesitated. This was the moment of truth, the moment when she would either save her son or lose him forever. She's been having an affair. The silence that followed was deafening. Laura could hear her own heartbeat in her ears. What did you say? Oliver's voice was barely audible. Isabella has been having an affair for at least 6 months. The man is wealthy and married. She's been using your money to fund their relationship. That's not true. It is true. My attorney hired an investigator. We have proof. You hired an investigator to spy on my wife. I hired an investigator to find out where $600,000 went. The affair was just what we discovered in the process. More silence. Then, in the background, Laura heard Isabella's voice clearly for the first time. What is she saying? What lies is she telling you about me? She says you're having an affair, Oliver said, his voice hollow. The explosion that followed was audible even through the phone denials, accusations, threats. Isabella called Laura every name in the book, and a few she'd never heard before. Oliver, Laura said quietly, ask her about Robert Hawkins. The screaming stopped abruptly. Who is Robert Hawkins? Oliver asked. Ask your wife. Laura heard muffled conversation. Then Oliver came back on the line. She says she doesn't know anyone by that name. He's 52 years old, owns a construction company, drives a black Mercedes. He's been paying for her jewelry and spa trips for months. His wife found out about the affair last week and made him end it. The phone went quiet again. This time the silence stretched for almost a full minute. Oliver, are you there? How do you know all this? His voice was barely audible. Because I hired professionals to find out where your money went. And what we discovered is that your wife has been systematically destroying your life to fund an affair with a married man who just dumped her. She's saying it's not true. Of course she is. What did you expect her to say? She's crying now. She's manipulating you. Again. Mom, I can't. I need to think. Think about this. Oliver, think about how she convinced you to sell your house without discussing it with me first, even though I had a legal interest in the property. Think about how she spent $600,000 in a few months while you were at work, trusting her to make responsible decisions. Think about how she slapped your mother in front of the entire neighborhood and then expected you to defend her. I'm hanging up now. Wait, but the line went dead. Laura sat in her kitchen staring at the phone, wondering if she'd just saved her son or lost him forever. Either way, she told him the truth. What he did with that information was up to him. The next morning, James Donovan called again. Laura, I have an update. Your son called my office this morning. He wants to meet. Meet about what? He didn't say specifically, but he sounded different. Defeated, maybe, or awakened. It's hard to tell. They arranged to meet at James's office that afternoon. Laura arrived early, nervous about seeing Oliver again. When he walked in, she barely recognized him. He'd always been thin, but now he looked gaunt. His clothes hung loosely on his frame, and there were dark circles under his eyes that made him look 10 years older. Hello, Mom, he said quietly, taking the chair across from her. Hello, Oliver? James sat behind his desk, legal pad ready. Oliver, you said you wanted to discuss the lawsuit. I want to know exactly what my wife has done, Oliver said. I want to see all the evidence. For the next hour, James laid out everything his investigator had discovered the affair with Robert Hawkins, documented through hotel receipts and credit card statements, The fake boutique investment that was nothing more than a way to funnel money to Alexis Moore. The pattern of financial deception with previous boyfriends. The mounting credit card debt that Oliver hadn't known about. With each revelation, Laura watched her son shrink further into his chair. By the time James finished, Oliver was staring at his hands, silent tears streaming down his face. "Where is she now?" Laura asked gently. "At the motel. She doesn't know I'm here." "What are you going to do?" Oliver looked up at her with red-rimmed eyes. "I don't know. Mom, I honestly don't know. My whole life, everything I thought I knew about my marriage, about my wife, it's all been a lie. I'm sorry, sweetheart. I truly am. She's been stealing from me for years, not just spending money actively deceiving me, lying to me, cheating on me. And when you tried to warn me, I chose her over you. You were manipulated by someone who's very good at manipulation. It's not your fault." "Isn't it? I'm 35 years old. Mom, I should have seen the signs. I should have questioned why she never wanted to work, why she always needed more money, why she was so eager to sell the house." James cleared his throat. "Oliver, the question now is what you want to do about the lawsuit. Your mother is entitled to the money you owe her, but we could potentially work out a payment plan if—" "No," Oliver interrupted. "She deserves to be paid back immediately, all of it. Son, you just said you don't have the money. I'll get it. I'll take out a loan, work extra hours, sell whatever I need to sell." "Mom, you've been trying to protect me my whole life, and I repaid you by letting my wife steal from you and assault you." He wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. "I won't fight the lawsuit. You deserve every penny." Laura felt her own eyes filling with tears. "Oliver," she said, "I want you to know that I'm filing for divorce today. I can't stay married to someone who's been lying to me about everything." The relief Laura felt was overwhelming. "What about Isabella? What will she do?" Oliver's face hardened. "That's not my problem anymore. She's an adult who made her own choices. Let her figure out how to live with the consequences." As they left James's office, Oliver and Laura walked to their cars together. At her car, he stopped and turned to her. "Mom, I know I don't deserve your forgiveness. I know I've hurt you in ways that might not be fixable. But I want you to know that I'm going to spend the rest of my life trying to make this right." Laura reached out and touched his cheek, the way she used to when he was little and needed comfort. "You already are making it right, sweetheart. You already are." As Laura drove home, she felt something she hadn't experienced in years, hope. Not just hope that she'd get her money back, but hope that she'd gotten her son back, too. But she also knew that Isabella wouldn't go quietly. A woman who'd spent years manipulating and deceiving wouldn't just accept defeat. She would fight back, and when she did, it would probably get ugly. Laura was right to be worried. The real battle was just beginning. Patricia Chen sat across from Laura in James Donovan's office, her slim laptop open on the mahogany table. At 45, Patricia had the sharp eyes of someone who'd spent 2 decades uncovering people's secrets. Her neat gray suit and practical haircut gave her an unassuming appearance, exactly what made her effective as a private investigator. "I've compiled a comprehensive background report on Isabella Green," Patricia said, her voice calm and methodical. "What we've found goes beyond the affair and financial deception. There's a clear pattern of predatory behavior dating back to her college years." She turned her laptop toward Laura and James, displaying a series of documents. Isabella Green isn't even her original name. She was born Isabella Mercer in a small town outside Indianapolis. She changed her name legally when she was 22, right after her first engagement ended badly. "Why would she change her name?" Laura asked. "To distance herself from her past," Patricia explained. Her first fiancé, Michael Collins, filed a police report against her for credit card fraud. She had opened several cards in his name without his knowledge and racked up over $30,000 in debt. The charges were eventually dropped when she agreed to pay restitution, but her reputation in Indianapolis was ruined. Laura felt a chill run through her, and Oliver knew none of this. "I doubt it. She's been very careful to erase her past. She also lied about her education. She never graduated from the state university she claims to have attended. In fact, she was expelled during her junior year for academic dishonesty, cheating on exams, and plagiarizing papers. So her interior design credentials are fake, too. Patricia nodded. Completely fabricated. She worked briefly as a receptionist at a design firm, which is how she learned enough of the terminology to sound convincing. James Donovan leaned forward, his silver hair catching the light. What about her family? Oliver mentioned her parents moved to Florida after the wedding. Patricia's expression grew even more serious. Her parents haven't moved anywhere. Her father died when she was 16, and her mother still lives in the same small house in Indiana where Isabella grew up. The sister she supposedly took on spa trips and redecorated a house for, she hasn't spoken to her in years. According to the sister, Isabella borrowed money years ago and never paid it back. Laura felt a growing horror as she realized the extent of Isabella's deception. It wasn't just about money, it was about an entirely fabricated identity. The woman Oliver had married was, in many ways, a complete fiction. "What about Robert Hawkins?" Laura asked. "Tell me about the affair." Patricia pulled up a series of photographs showing Isabella entering an upscale hotel in downtown Chicago. In several images, she was accompanied by a distinguished-looking man in his early 50s. Robert Hawkins owns one of the largest construction companies in Illinois. He met Isabella at a charity event last year, an event she attended using money from Oliver's account. They've been meeting at the Palmer House Hotel twice a week for the past 6 months. The evidence was irrefutable. Credit card statements showed expensive dinners, jewelry purchases, and hotel charges. There were text messages recovered from a cloud backup of Isabella's phone, filled with intimate details and plans for their meetings. His wife discovered the affair through their joint credit card statements, Patricia continued. She confronted him 2 weeks ago and gave him an ultimatum: end the affair or face divorce. He chose his marriage. And that's when Isabella suddenly needed to sell the house, Laura said, pieces falling into place. Exactly. With Hawkins cutting her off and her credit cards maxed out, she needed a new source of funds. The house was her last remaining asset, or rather, Oliver's last remaining asset. Laura sat back, trying to process it all. Does Oliver know the full extent of this? He's seen the evidence of the affair, James said, but not all of these details about her past. He needs to know everything, Laura insisted. He's filing for divorce. This information could be crucial. As they discussed next steps, James's receptionist knocked on the door. "Excuse me, Mr. Donovan, there's a Mrs. Isabella Green in the reception area demanding to see you. She's quite upset." James exchanged glances with Laura and Patricia. "Tell her I'll be out in a moment." After the receptionist left, James turned to Laura. "You should stay here, Patricia. Can you take Laura out through the back entrance? I'll deal with Isabella." Laura gathered her purse, her hands shaking slightly. "What do you think she wants?" "To intimidate us, most likely," James said. "But don't worry. She has no power here." As Patricia led Laura toward the back door, they could hear Isabella's voice rising in the reception area. "I know she's in there. I have a right to know what lies you're spreading about me." Laura slipped out the rear exit with Patricia, grateful to avoid a confrontation, but she knew this was just the beginning of Isabella's counterattack. The next day, Isabella made her move. Laura was at work, reconciling accounts at Robinson Accounting, when the receptionist called back to her desk. "Laura, there's someone here to see you. She says she's your daughter-in-law." Laura's stomach dropped. "Tell her I'm busy and can't see visitors during work hours." A few minutes later, the receptionist called again, her voice tense. "She's not leaving. She says she'll wait all day if she has to. She's making other clients uncomfortable." Laura sighed and walked to the front office. Isabella was sitting in the waiting area, dressed in what appeared to be a new designer outfit, looking like she was ready for a business meeting rather than whatever confrontation she had planned. "Isabella, you need to leave. This is my workplace." "I just want to talk," Isabella said loudly enough for everyone in the office to hear. 5 minutes. That's all I'm asking." Laura could see her coworkers watching from their desks, curious about the drama unfolding in their usually quiet office. "We have nothing to discuss. Please, Laura." Isabella's voice softened, her eyes widening with practiced sincerity. "I know I made mistakes. I know I hurt you and Oliver, but I'm trying to make it right." The sincerity in her voice was so convincing that for a moment Laura almost believed her. Then she remembered that this was the same woman who had looked her son in the eye and lied about having affairs, spending money, and a dozen other things. "What do you want, Isabella?" "I want to settle the lawsuit. I want to make things right between us." "Fine. Pay me the $67,000 you owe me, and I'll drop the suit." "You know I don't have that kind of money." "Then we have nothing to discuss." Isabella stood up, moving closer to Laura. "Laura, please. I made mistakes, but I don't deserve to have my life destroyed over them. You destroyed your own life when you decided to steal from family and cheat on your husband." The mask slipped for just a second, and Laura saw the real Isabella underneath, cold, calculating, dangerous. "Fine," Isabella said quietly. "If that's how you want to play it, then that's how we'll play it. But don't think this is over. I know things about your precious son that would surprise you." "What kind of things?" Isabella smiled, a cruel expression that made Laura's skin crawl. "Let's just say Oliver hasn't been completely honest with you about everything." Before Laura could ask what she meant, Isabella turned and walked out of the office, leaving Laura standing there with a growing sense of dread. That evening, Laura called Oliver and told him about Isabella's visit. "She said she knows things about you that would surprise me." "What did she mean?" Oliver was quiet for a long moment. "Mom, there are some things I never told you, things I'm not proud of." Laura's heart sank. "What kind of things, When Isabella and I were first married, I did some things, some financial things that weren't completely legal." "What do you mean?" "I falsified some documents to get a better loan rate on our first car. I also didn't report some cash income on our taxes one year. And when we bought the house, I may have inflated my income on the mortgage application." Laura felt sick. "Oliver, why didn't you tell me this?" "Because I was ashamed, and because Isabella said it was normal, that everyone did things like that." He paused. "And she has proof of this. She kept copies of everything. She said it was for our records. But now I think she was keeping it as insurance in case I ever tried to leave her." Laura closed her eyes, understanding the full scope of what they were dealing with. Isabella wasn't just a manipulative spendthrift. She was a criminal who had been systematically compromising her son for years, creating evidence she could use to destroy him if he ever tried to escape. "Oliver, you need to tell James Donovan about this immediately." "Mom, if this comes out, I could go to jail. I could lose my job, my professional license, everything. And if you don't tell him and Isabella uses it against us in court, you'll lose everything anyway. At least this way we can try to control how it comes out." The next morning, Laura sat in James Donovan's office with her son as he confessed to his financial crimes. James listened without judgment, taking notes and asking clarifying questions. When Oliver finished, James leaned back in his chair and studied them both. "This is serious," he said finally. "But it's not insurmountable. The statute of limitations has passed on some of these issues, and the others can potentially be resolved through voluntary disclosure and payment of penalties." "What about the lawsuit?" Laura asked. "The lawsuit just got more complicated. But Laura, I want you to understand something. Your daughter-in-law isn't just trying to avoid paying you back. She's trying to destroy your son's life as punishment for leaving her. This isn't about money anymore. This is about control." As they left James's office, Laura realized that the real battle was just beginning. Isabella had shown her true colors, and she was willing to destroy everyone around her rather than accept responsibility for her actions. But Laura wasn't the same woman who had opened her door to them 3 weeks ago. She was stronger now, angrier, and absolutely determined to protect her son from the monster he had married. The war was far from over, but for the first time, Laura felt like they might actually win. 2 weeks after Oliver's confession, Isabella made her most desperate move yet. Laura was awakened at 3 a.m. by her security system's alert. Someone was at her front door. The cameras showed Isabella, clearly intoxicated, pounding on the door and shouting. Laura grabbed her phone, ready to call the police, when she noticed Oliver's SUV parked at the curb. He was slumped over the steering wheel. Laura cracked open her window. "Isabella, step away from my door right now, or I'm calling the police." "Come out and face me, you coward," Isabella slurred. You've turned my husband against me with your lies. Laura dialed 911, giving the dispatcher her address and explaining the situation. Then she went downstairs and spoke through the door's intercom. The police are on their way. Isabella, go home. I don't have a home anymore, Isabella screamed, kicking the door. Oliver is filing for divorce, and it's all your fault. Laura glanced at the security monitor again. Oliver hadn't moved from the car. Something was wrong. Where is Oliver supposed to be right now? Laura asked, a new fear gripping her. Passed out in the car. Isabella laughed bitterly. He couldn't handle the truth about Mommy Dearest. Laura's blood ran cold. She opened the front door just enough to see past Isabella to the car. What did you do to him? Nothing he didn't do to himself. A few too many drinks, that's all. But something in Isabella's tone made Laura deeply uneasy. Without hesitation, she pushed past her daughter-in-law and ran to the SUV. When she opened the driver's door, Oliver slumped sideways, barely conscious. Oliver, can you hear me? His eyes fluttered open, unfocused and glassy. Mom, I don't feel right. Laura turned to Isabella, who was watching from the porch with a strange smile. What did you give him? Just some sleeping pills to help him relax. He was so upset after I showed him the photos. What photos? Isabella's smile widened. The ones of you meeting with Robert Hawkins last week. Isn't it funny how things look when taken out of context? Laura's mind raced. She had indeed met with Robert Hawkins at James Donovan's office to discuss his testimony for the upcoming court case. But Isabella had clearly manipulated the images to suggest something inappropriate. You drugged my son because of your lies. Laura's voice shook with rage. I opened his eyes to the truth about his precious mother. The wail of sirens cut through the night air. Isabella's smile faltered. You should go now, Laura said coldly. Unless you want to explain to the police why you drugged your husband and brought him here in this condition. Isabella hesitated, then backed away. This isn't over. Laura, not by a long shot. She disappeared into the darkness just as the police cruiser turned onto the street. Laura turned her attention back to Oliver, who was barely conscious. Stay with me, sweetheart. Help is coming. The paramedics arrived minutes after the police. They quickly assessed Oliver, finding his vital signs stable but concerning. Ma'am, do you know what he took? One paramedic asked. His wife said sleeping pills, but I don't know what kind or how many. They loaded Oliver into the ambulance, Laura climbing in beside him. As they sped toward the hospital, she held his hand, praying that Isabella hadn't done something truly unforgivable. At the emergency room, doctors pumped Oliver's stomach and administered activated charcoal. Hours later, he was awake and stable, though groggy and confused. What happened? He asked, his voice hoarse. Laura sat beside his hospital bed, still holding his hand. Isabella drugged you, sweetheart. She gave you sleeping pills with alcohol. Oliver closed his eyes. Pain etched across his face. She showed me pictures of you and Robert. Said you were sleeping with him, too. That's not true, Oliver. I met with Robert at James's office to discuss his testimony for the lawsuit. Isabella manipulated the photos to make it look like something it wasn't. He nodded slowly. I knew it couldn't be true, but she was so convincing, and I was so angry and confused. I started drinking, and then she offered me something to help me sleep. She could have killed you, Laura said, her voice breaking. If she'd given you just a little more, or if I hadn't found you when I did. Oliver squeezed her hand weakly. I'm done, Mom. I'm done with her for good. Later that morning, James Donovan arrived at the hospital, his face grim. The police want to know if you'll be pressing charges against Isabella for drugging Oliver, he said. Oliver nodded without hesitation. Yes, it's time she faced consequences for her actions. There's something else, James continued. Isabella has been contacting your colleagues at work. Oliver, she's telling them about the financial irregularities, trying to get you fired before you can damage control the situation. Oliver closed his eyes, despair washing over his face. So it's over. My career, my reputation, everything. Not necessarily, James said. I've spoken with a friend at the district attorney's office. If you voluntarily disclose the financial issues and make restitution, They may be willing to offer a deal, especially given the circumstances with Isabella. What kind of deal? Probation, fines, possibly community service but no jail time, and potentially a path to keep your professional license. Oliver looked at his mother, uncertainty in his eyes. Do it, Laura said firmly. Come clean about everything. It's the only way to take back control of your life. Over the next week, as Oliver recovered from his ordeal, they put their plan into action. Oliver worked with James to prepare a voluntary disclosure of all financial irregularities. He met with his employer, explaining the situation and offering his resignation, which, to his surprise, was not accepted. His boss had seen Isabella's erratic behavior firsthand when she'd shown up at the office making wild accusations. Get your life sorted out, his boss had told him. We'll reassess when this is all over. Meanwhile, Laura faced her own battle. Isabella had begun a systematic campaign to destroy her reputation in the community. She contacted Laura's neighbors, spreading lies about elder abuse and financial exploitation. She showed up at the community center where Laura volunteered, causing such a scene that Laura was asked to take a leave of absence. The most painful blow came when Isabella approached Ellen Thompson with fabricated stories about Laura's past. She told me you'd been stealing from Oliver for years, Ellen confided when she came to check on Laura. Said you had a gambling problem that Thomas had kept hidden. I knew it couldn't be true, but she was so convincing, with fake bank statements and everything. Laura was devastated but not surprised. Isabella was fighting with the desperation of someone who had nothing left to lose. The breaking point came when Isabella violated the restraining order that James had helped them obtain after the drugging incident. She showed up at Laura's house again, this time in broad daylight, screaming accusations for all the neighbors to hear. When the police arrived, Isabella refused to leave, resulting in her second arrest for trespassing and violation of a court order. This time, the judge was not sympathetic. Isabella was held without bail pending a psychiatric evaluation. The evaluation revealed what Laura had suspected all along. Isabella showed clear signs of antisocial personality disorder, with manipulative and exploitative behaviors dating back to her adolescence. As their court date approached, Laura and Oliver prepared themselves for what would undoubtedly be Isabella's final desperate attempt to avoid responsibility. James had warned them that she would likely try to paint herself as the victim, claiming emotional abuse and manipulation. What they didn't expect was for Isabella to approach them with an offer the day before the trial. She wants to settle, James said during an emergency meeting in his office. She's offering to sign over her rights to any marital property and agree to a divorce without contest, in exchange for dropping all criminal charges. Oliver looked at Laura, conflict evident in his eyes. Part of me wants to take the deal just to be done with her. What does your heart tell you? Laura asked gently. Oliver was quiet for a long moment. That if we let her walk away without consequences, she'll just do this to someone else. She needs to face what she's done not just to me, but to you, and probably to others before us. Laura nodded, pride swelling in her chest. This was the son she had raised, a man of principle who understood that true justice wasn't about revenge, but about preventing future harm. Then we go to court, Laura said simply. Together, that night, as Laura prepared for the trial, she received an unexpected visitor. A young woman stood on her doorstep, nervously shifting from foot to foot. Mrs. Jackson, my name is Jessica Green. I'm Isabella's sister. Laura's security system had captured the woman's image, and Laura studied her through the monitor before opening the door. There was a resemblance to Isabella, but this woman's eyes held none of the coldness or calculation that characterized her sister. What can I do for you, Jessica? Laura asked cautiously. I need to talk to you about Isabella. There are things you should know before the trial tomorrow. She held up a small flash drive, things that might help your case. Laura invited her in, offering tea while Jessica explained her presence. Isabella and I haven't spoken in years, Jessica said, her hands wrapped around the warm mug. She borrowed money from me when I was going through chemotherapy and never paid it back. When I asked for it, she told everyone in our family that I was a drug addict trying to scam her. Jessica's story was heartbreaking, a pattern of exploitation and betrayal that stretched back to their childhood. Isabella had manipulated their mother out of her savings, conned former friends, and left a trail of financial and emotional devastation wherever she went. "I saw the news about her arrest," Jessica continued, "and I knew I had to come forward. She's hurt too many people." She pushed the flash drive across the table. "These are emails and financial records showing what she did to our mother and me. There are also messages from her to Robert Hawkins, planning how to get more money out of Oliver." Laura stared at the small device that contained yet more evidence of Isabella's deception. "Why are you doing this?" "She's your sister." Jessica's eyes filled with tears. "Because someone needs to stop her. And because what she did to you and your son. It's unforgivable." As Jessica left, Laura called James to tell him about the new evidence. Tomorrow would be the final confrontation, the day when Isabella would finally face the consequences of her actions. And Laura would be there, standing beside her son, ready to reclaim the lives that Isabella had nearly destroyed. The courtroom was smaller than Laura had expected, with worn wooden benches and fluorescent lighting that made everyone look pale and tired. She sat behind James Donovan's table, her hands folded in her lap, watching as Isabella entered with her attorney. Sarah Reynolds, a sharp-dressed woman in her 40s who looked like she charged by the minute. Isabella had clearly spent money she didn't have on her appearance for court. Her hair was freshly styled, her makeup perfect, and she wore a conservative blue dress that probably cost more than Laura made in a week. She was playing the role of the wronged daughter-in-law, the victim of a vindictive mother-in-law's harassment. Oliver sat beside Laura, looking nervous but determined. Over the past week, he'd worked with James to voluntarily disclose his financial irregularities to the appropriate authorities. It would mean paying penalties and potentially facing professional censure, but it also meant Isabella couldn't use the information to destroy him. "All rise," the bailiff announced as Judge Gloria Harris entered. She was a woman in her 60s with silver hair and the kind of stern expression that suggested she'd heard every sob story in the book. Laura took a deep breath, reminding herself that this woman had seen it all: manipulators, liars, fraudsters. Surely she would see through Isabella's act. Isabella's attorney, Ms. Reynolds, went first. She painted a picture of a young woman trapped in an impossible situation, victimized by a mother-in-law who had never accepted her and was now using the legal system to interfere in their marriage. "Your Honor," Ms. Reynolds said in a voice dripping with sympathy, "my client made some poor financial decisions, as many young people do, but Mrs. Jackson's response has been disproportionate and vindictive. She hired private investigators to spy on my client, encouraged her son to file for divorce, and is now trying to extract money from a woman who has no means to pay." She made Isabella sound like an innocent victim who had maybe spent a little too much money on clothes, rather than a woman who had systematically stolen over $600,000 while conducting an affair. When it was James's turn, he methodically laid out the facts: the $40,000 loan documented in a legally binding promissory note, the 3 years of missed payments despite repeated attempts to collect, the sale of the house without satisfying the lien, the assault that had been witnessed by multiple neighbors. "Your Honor," James said, "this is not a case of a vindictive mother-in-law harassing her daughter-in-law. This is a case of a woman who has been systematically defrauded by someone who viewed her as an easy mark." Then he did something Laura wasn't expecting. He called Robert Hawkins as a witness. Laura turned to see a middle-aged man in an expensive suit entering the courtroom, his face grim. He looked like he'd rather be anywhere else in the world. Under oath, Robert confirmed the affair. He testified that Isabella had told him she was getting divorced, that she had money from her family, and that she needed help maintaining her lifestyle during the separation. He had paid for jewelry, vacations, and expensive dinners, believing she was a wealthy woman going through a difficult divorce. "She told me her husband was abusive and that his mother was trying to steal her inheritance," Robert testified, not looking at Isabella. "She said she needed money to fight them in court." Isabella's face had gone completely white. Her attorney was frantically scribbling notes, clearly not having expected this testimony. "Did you know that Mrs. Isabella Green was using money from the sale of her marital home to fund your relationship?" James asked. "No, I did not. If I had known, I never would have participated." "And when did this relationship end?" "Last month. My wife discovered the affair and threatened to leave me if I didn't end it immediately. When James finished with Robert, Ms. Reynolds tried to minimize the damage. She argued that the affair was irrelevant to the financial dispute, that whatever mistakes Isabella had made in her personal life didn't negate the fact that the lawsuit was excessive. But Judge Harris looked unimpressed. When Miss Reynolds sat down, the judge leaned forward and studied the paperwork in front of her. "Ms. Green," she said, addressing Isabella directly, "do you dispute that you signed the promissory note agreeing to repay Mrs. Jackson $40,000? "No, Your Honor. But do you dispute that you failed to make any payments on this note for 3 years? The circumstances were, do you dispute that you and your husband sold the house that secured this loan without paying off the debt?" Isabella's attorney stood up. "Your Honor, my client was not personally responsible for—" "Sit down, counselor. I'm asking your client direct questions." Isabella looked like she was about to cry. "Your Honor, I didn't understand the legal implications. Mrs. Green, you're 32 years old. Are you claiming you didn't understand that borrowing money meant you had to pay it back? It wasn't supposed to be a real loan. It was family money." Judge Harris's expression grew even sterner. "Mrs. Green, do you see your signature on this promissory note?" "Yes, but did anyone force you to sign it?" "No, but then it's a real loan, regardless of your family relationship." The judge then turned her attention to the assault charge. She had Ellen Thompson testify about what she'd witnessed, as well as the police officers who had responded to the call. When Ms. Reynolds tried to argue that it was just a family dispute that got out of hand, Judge Harris cut her off. "Counselor, assault is assault. The relationship between the parties is irrelevant." Next, James presented the flash drive Jessica Green had provided, containing emails and financial records that further documented Isabella's pattern of deception and manipulation. "Your Honor, with the court's permission, I'd like to call a surprise witness," James said. Jessica Green, the sister of the defendant. Isabella's head snapped up, her eyes wide with shock and fear. "No," she whispered, loud enough for Laura to hear. She wouldn't dare, but Jessica did dare. She entered the courtroom with her head held high, though Laura could see her hands shaking. On the stand, Jessica testified about Isabella's history of financial exploitation, including stealing from their mother during her battle with cancer and defrauding Jessica herself when she was undergoing chemotherapy. "My sister has always used people," Jessica said, her voice steady despite the tears in her eyes. "She finds their vulnerabilities and exploits them. She's done it since we were children." Isabella's attorney objected repeatedly, claiming the testimony was prejudicial and irrelevant, but Judge Harris overruled her each time. "The defendant's pattern of behavior is highly relevant to this case," the judge stated firmly. Finally, James presented evidence of Isabella's spending patterns, the jewelry purchases, the spa treatments, the fake boutique investment. He showed how over $600,000 had been spent in less than 6 months with no assets to show for it. "Your Honor," James said, "this isn't a case of poor financial management. This is a case of systematic fraud. Mrs. Isabella Green used her husband's money to fund an extramarital affair while deliberately avoiding her legal obligations to my client." When both sides had presented their cases, Judge Harris called a brief recess. Laura went to the bathroom and splashed cold water on her face, trying to process everything she'd heard. The full scope of Isabella's deception was even worse than she'd imagined. When court resumed, Judge Harris had clearly made her decision. "Mrs. Isabella Green," she began, "I have never seen such a clear-cut case of financial fraud and manipulation. You borrowed $40,000 from your husband's mother, agreed to specific repayment terms, then spent 3 years avoiding your obligations while spending over $600,000 on personal luxuries and an extramarital affair." Isabella started crying, but Judge Harris wasn't finished. "When confronted about your behavior, you physically assaulted the woman you had stolen from and attempted to manipulate the legal system to avoid the consequences of your actions." She turned to her paperwork. "I am ruling in favor of the plaintiff, Mrs. Isabella Green. You are ordered to pay Mrs. Delora Jackson the full amount of $67,000 within 30 days. If you fail to comply, I will authorize wage garnishment and asset seizure." Isabella's sobbing grew louder. "Furthermore," Judge Harris continued, "I am forwarding this case to the district attorney's office for potential criminal fraud charges. The systematic deception and theft demonstrated in this case goes far beyond a civil matter. Ms. Reynolds stood up quickly. Your Honor, my client has no assets with which to pay this judgment. Then your client should have thought about that before spending over $600,000 on jewelry and spa treatments. This court will not reward financial fraud with sympathy. As they left the courthouse, Isabella was still crying in the hallway, her attorney trying to calm her down. She looked at Laura with pure hatred. This isn't over, she hissed as Laura walked past. You think you've won, but this isn't over. Laura stopped and looked at Isabella, really looked at her for what she knew would be the last time. Yes, Isabella, she said quietly. It is over. It's been over since the moment you raised your hand to me. 3 weeks after the trial, Laura sat at her kitchen table with Oliver, sharing a simple dinner of pot roast, his favorite since childhood. The atmosphere between them was different now, more relaxed but also more honest. Gone was the careful avoidance of difficult topics that had characterized their relationship during Oliver's marriage. In its place was a new understanding, forged through shared pain and survival. I found an apartment, Oliver said, cutting into his roast. It's small, just 1 bedroom, but it's in a decent neighborhood and I can afford it on my salary. Laura nodded, watching her son. The shadows under his eyes had begun to fade, and some of the weight he'd lost was returning. He looked more like himself every day. That's wonderful, sweetheart. When do you move in? This weekend. My boss gave me a few days off to get settled. He paused, his fork halfway to his mouth. I still can't believe they didn't fire me after everything that happened. They saw through Isabella's accusations, Laura said. And you did the right thing by coming forward about the financial issues yourself. People respect honesty and taking responsibility. Oliver had been lucky. His voluntary disclosure of the financial irregularities had resulted in fines and 2 years probation, but no criminal charges. His professional license had been placed under review, but he was permitted to continue working under supervision. It was a second chance he hadn't expected. Have you heard anything about Isabella? Laura asked carefully. Oliver shook his head. Not directly. Jessica called yesterday to tell me Isabella's been charged with multiple counts of fraud. Apparently, the DA found evidence that the boutique investment wasn't the first time she'd run that scam. What about Alexis Moore, her friend who took the $300,000, arrested last week in Miami? She was trying to flee to the Bahamas. Oliver sighed. All that money is gone. Mom, we're never getting it back. Laura reached across the table and squeezed his hand. It's just money. Oliver, we got something more valuable back you. After dinner, as they were washing dishes together, Oliver's phone buzzed with a text. He glanced at it, then frowned. What is it? Laura asked. Unknown number? He showed her the screen. I know where you both live. This isn't over. Laura felt a chill run through her. Do you think it's Isabella? Who else would it be? Oliver blocked the number and deleted the message. She's just trying to scare us. But the texts continued over the next few days, coming from different numbers, each more threatening than the last. You'll regret what you did to me. I'll make sure everyone knows what kind of people you really are. You think you're safe. Think again. James Donovan advised them to keep records of all the messages but not to engage. She's trying to provoke a reaction, he explained. The best thing you can do is ignore her. Easier said than done. Laura installed additional security cameras around her house and made sure all her doors and windows were securely locked. Oliver did the same at his new apartment, but Isabella's campaign of harassment went beyond threatening texts. She began spreading rumors in the community, telling Laura's neighbors that she was mentally unstable, suggesting to Oliver's colleagues that he had a drinking problem, even approaching Ellen Thompson with fabricated stories about Laura's past. She told me you'd been abusing Oliver emotionally for years, Ellen confided when she came by for coffee. Said you'd driven away every woman he ever dated because you couldn't stand to share him. I told her I'd known you for 15 years and never seen any sign of that, but she was very convincing. The worst came when Isabella somehow gained access to Laura's email account and sent a message to everyone in her address book, claiming Laura had been embezzling funds from the community center where she volunteered. Though the accusation was quickly proven false, the damage to Laura's reputation required time to repair. Why is she doing this? Laura asked James during a phone call. She lost the case. Why can't she just move on? Because people like Isabella don't know how to lose, James explained. They can't accept responsibility or consequences. In her mind, she's the victim and you're the villain. She'll keep trying to hurt you because it's the only way she can maintain that narrative. One evening, as Laura was returning home from the grocery store, she found her front door ajar. Heart pounding, she retreated to her car and called the police. Officers searched her house, finding it ransacked, drawers emptied, furniture overturned, personal items strewn across the floor. But nothing of value had been taken. Instead, someone had written on her bedroom mirror in red lipstick, "You took everything from me. Now I'm taking everything from you." Detective Reynolds, who had taken Laura's statement after the assault, handled the break-in case. "We're taking this very seriously. Mrs. Jackson," she assured Laura. "This is clearly targeted harassment, and the escalation is concerning." "Do you think Isabella did this herself?" Laura asked, surveying the damage to her home. "We're looking into it. Her whereabouts during the time of the break-in are being verified." Detective Reynolds hesitated. "Mrs. Jackson, have you considered getting a restraining order?" "We already have one from when she drugged Oliver. It doesn't seem to be doing much good." "Then perhaps it's time to consider other options for your safety." Laura knew what the detective was suggesting, though neither of them said it aloud. Perhaps it was time to move, to start fresh somewhere Isabella couldn't find her. The idea had been growing in Laura's mind for weeks. Her house held so many memories raising Oliver. Her life with Thomas, but it also held recent traumas. Maybe it was time for a new chapter. When she mentioned the possibility to Oliver, he was surprisingly supportive. "I've been thinking about it too. Mom, maybe we both need a fresh start." "But your job? Your apartment you just got settled?" Oliver shrugged. "My company has an office in Phoenix. I already asked about a transfer, and they're considering it." Arizona. Laura felt a flutter of excitement at the thought. She'd always loved the desert. The expansive skies, the dramatic sunsets. Why not? It's warm, affordable, and far from here. We could both use some sunshine after everything we've been through. A week later, Laura received news that made the decision easier. Isabella had been arrested again, this time for violating the restraining order by showing up at Oliver's workplace. But her attorney had negotiated a plea deal Isabella would undergo psychiatric treatment instead of serving jail time. "She'll be in a facility for at least 6 months, James told Laura. "But after that, there's no guarantee she won't resume her harassment." That evening, Laura sat on her back porch, watching the sunset and thinking about the future. The idea of leaving Chicago, of starting over somewhere new, was both terrifying and exhilarating. At 64, was she too old for such a dramatic change? She thought about Thomas, about what he would advise. He had always believed in facing challenges head-on, in making bold decisions when necessary. "Life's too short to live in fear, Laura," he used to say, as if in answer. Laura's phone rang. It was a real estate agent she'd contacted about listing her house. "Mrs. Jackson, I have good news. There's a lot of interest in your neighborhood right now. If we list your house next week, I think we could get a very competitive price." Laura took a deep breath. "Let's do it." 2 months later, Laura's house sold for $50,000 above asking price. Oliver had secured his transfer to Phoenix, and Laura had found a small condo in a retirement community called Desert Palms, just 20 minutes from Oliver's new apartment. As she packed up her home of 15 years, Laura found herself sorting through not just physical belongings, but memories as well. Some items went into boxes for the move, others were given to friends or donated. The process was cathartic, a physical representation of leaving the past behind. Ellen Thompson came by to help on the final day of packing. "I can't believe you're really leaving," Ellen said, carefully wrapping Laura's china in newspaper. "It's time," Laura replied simply. "Too much has happened here. We'll miss you terribly." "The neighborhood won't be the same without you," Laura smiled, touched by her friend's words. "We'll stay in touch, and you can visit anytime you want. Phoenix has beautiful winters." As the moving truck pulled away from her empty house, Laura stood on the sidewalk for a long moment, saying a silent goodbye to the life she'd built there. Then she got into her car, where Oliver was waiting to begin the long drive west. "Ready, Mom?" he asked. Laura looked at her son, really looked at him. The drawn, defeated man who had stood in her living room 4 months ago was gone. In his place was the Oliver she remembered strong, kind, resilient. "Yes," she said, feeling a weight lift from her shoulders. "I'm ready." Desert Palms Retirement Community in Scottsdale, Arizona, was everything Laura had hoped for. Her small condo had a view of the mountains, a community garden where she could tend her own plot, and neighbors who shared her interests in books and art. The dry heat was a welcome change from Chicago's humid summers and brutal winters. Oliver visited every weekend, sometimes staying for dinner, other times taking her to explore the area. He seemed to be thriving in his new position, making friends and even considering dating again, though he approached relationships with newfound caution. "I'm seeing a therapist," he told Laura one evening as they sat on her patio watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of pink and gold. "She's helping me understand why I was so vulnerable to Isabella's manipulation." "That's wonderful, sweetheart. I'm proud of you. I should have done it years ago. Maybe I would have seen the warning signs." Laura shook her head. "Don't torture yourself with what-ifs. We can't change the past, but we can learn from it." Oliver nodded, sipping his iced tea. "She thinks I was looking for someone to replace Dad, someone strong and decisive who would tell me what to do. That's why I ignored all the red flags with Isabella." The insight struck Laura as painfully accurate. Thomas had been the family's rock, the one who made the big decisions. After his death, Oliver had seemed lost, uncertain. Isabella's confidence and decisiveness must have seemed like a lifeline. "Your father would be so proud of you now," Laura said softly. "Taking responsibility, rebuilding your life. That takes real courage." As the months passed, the threatening texts and emails stopped. Isabella seemed to have disappeared from their lives, though Laura knew better than to believe she was gone for good. People like Isabella didn't simply give up, but she refused to live in fear. She joined the book club at Desert Palms, took up watercolor painting, and made new friends who knew nothing of her past troubles. She was building a life defined by joy and connection rather than trauma and betrayal. One evening, as Laura was watering her garden, her neighbor Margaret called over the fence. "Laura, there's someone at your door." "A young woman. She looks upset." Laura's heart skipped a beat, but when she walked around to the front of her condo, she saw it wasn't Isabella. It was a woman in her 20s with brown hair and tired eyes. "Mrs. Jackson, my name is Jennifer. I know this is strange, but I need to talk to you about Isabella Green." Laura studied her face, seeing something familiar in her features but unable to place it. "How do you know Isabella?" "She's engaged to my father," Jennifer said, her voice breaking slightly. "And she's been doing to our family what she did to yours." They sat on Laura's small patio as Jennifer told her story. Isabella had moved to Florida after her psychiatric treatment ended, using a different name and a carefully crafted sob story about being victimized by her ex-husband's family. She had met Jennifer's father, a widower with a successful real estate business, at a charity function and quickly became engaged to him. "She spent over $200,000 of his money in just 3 months, Jennifer said, twisting a tissue in her hands. "When I tried to warn him, she told him I was jealous because I was afraid of losing my inheritance. Now he barely speaks to me." "How did you find me?" Laura asked. "I hired a private investigator. He found the court records from your lawsuit and told me you'd moved to Arizona. I know it's presumptuous to show up like this, but I didn't know where else to turn." Laura felt a wave of déjà vu, remembering her own desperation when she'd first discovered the extent of Isabella's deception. "What do you want from me?" "Help," Jennifer said simply. "You're the only person who's ever successfully stood up to her and won. I need to know how you did it." Laura made them both tea and told Jennifer everything: the investigation, the lawsuit, the importance of documenting everything and never backing down. "The key," she said finally, "is understanding that you can't save someone from their own choices. You can only protect yourself and the people you care about." Jennifer stayed for dinner, and they talked until late in the evening about family, manipulation, and the courage it takes to do the right thing when the right thing is hard. After she left, Laura sat on her patio looking up at the Arizona stars, thinking about the strange journey that had brought her here. A year ago, she'd thought her life was simple and settled. She'd had no idea that her greatest challenge and her greatest victory was still ahead of her. Sometimes the most important battles are the ones you never wanted to fight, fought against people you never wanted to hurt, in defense of principles you never thought you'd have to defend. But when those battles come, you have two choices: fight or surrender everything you've worked for to people who see your kindness as weakness. Laura had chosen to fight, and in fighting, she had discovered that at 64 years old, she was stronger than she'd ever imagined. The roses in her garden were blooming beautifully, their petals soft and fragrant in the desert evening. Like her, they had survived transplanting and were thriving in new soil. Some things, she realized, grow stronger when they're forced to put down new roots. The next morning, Laura woke to a text from Oliver Breakfast at my place on Saturday. "I've met someone I'd like you to meet." Laura smiled, typing back, "I'd love to. Should I bring anything? Just yourself. And maybe some of those blueberry muffins you make." Laura set down her phone, feeling a contentment she hadn't experienced in years. Life would continue to bring challenges that was inevitable. Isabella might even reappear someday, though Laura hoped Jennifer would be successful in protecting her father from that fate. But whatever came, Laura knew she could handle it. She had discovered a resilience within herself that couldn't be taken away. She had learned the true value of trust, not just in others, but in herself. As she stepped out onto her patio with her morning coffee, the Arizona sun was just beginning to illuminate the mountains in the distance. The day stretched before her, full of possibilities. Laura Jackson had lost her house, nearly lost her son, and been forced to start over at an age when most people were settling into comfortable routines. But in the process, she had gained something far more valuable: the knowledge that it's never too late to stand up for yourself, to rebuild what's been broken, and to find happiness in unexpected places. The desert flowers in her garden nodded in the gentle morning breeze, vibrant and alive despite the harsh environment. Laura smiled, recognizing herself in their quiet strength and determination to bloom wherever they were planted. She had survived the winter of betrayal. Now it was time to enjoy the spring of new beginnings.